was navies that ruled the world. That's certainly what made the British Empire dominant for centuries. Since then, America has taken over the mantle. There are 11 U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups, any one of which could reasonably be argued to have more naval power than any other country as a whole. But I'm not sure if mere size of ships and tonnage of ships is the measurement. I point out, for example, in the war between Ukraine and Russia, that Russia by far has the dominant naval force. I don't even think Ukraine has much of one at all. Russia essentially seized it and annexed it along with Crimea. But look at what Ukraine has been able to do with sea drones. It's been able to sink ship after ship in the Russian Navy, including the mighty ship Moskva, which means Moscow. It would be like sinking an American ship called America. My point is that navies are measured in different ways these days, and so it comes to China's navy, already by far the most numerous navy in the world measured by sheer number of ships. I think they only have 3 aircraft carriers, 2 of which are basically test beds or training vessels. The third hasn't fully been deployed as far as I know. But what they're doing with their little boats is asymmetrical, is powerful in any event. Let me point out a shocking story that just happened earlier today, Philippines time. The headline, China says Philippine vessel, quote, deliberately collided with Chinese vessel in the South China Sea. Now, do you believe that Reuters headline? Do you think that the Philippines rammed a Chinese ship, or do you think perhaps just a chance it was the other way around? Here's some footage showing the smashed up Philippine ships. And joining us now to help make sense of this is our friend Gordon Chang, who you can follow at Gordon G. Chang on Twitter. Gordon, great to see you again. China is flexing its muscle in the seas against everybody these days, isn't it?
It certainly is. And it's not just the Philippines, although it's primarily the Philippines in the last month, but of course against Taiwan and against Japan. So we're talking about South China Sea, East China Sea, Taiwan Strait. And that means that Beijing is just looking for a fight. We can't say that Xi Jinping has decided to go to war, but what we can say is that Xi Jinping has made the decision to risk war, because today, on June 17th, and many other days, he has in fact risked war.
Now, if I understand what happened, these were Coast Guard vessels of the respective countries, the Philippine Coast Guard and the Chinese Coast Guard. They collided. It's a neutral way of saying it. Now, China is saying the Philippines caused that, but it looks from the imagery like it was the Chinese boats doing the ramming. And I understand from reading your work that China actually builds its ships with a ramming potential, that this isn't some accident. This is one of the ways they use their navy. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. We have seen that video, and it shows that in both instances, it is the Chinese boats that rammed the Philippine vessels. And you're right. China has been building its Coast Guard vessels and others with rams. So clearly this is an engagement that they have talked about and they've undoubtedly have practiced. The Soviets did this during the Cold War. And we're seeing basically China do the same thing. And it's not just on today. I mentioned June 17th. That was where we saw some extremely aggressive Chinese activities at Second Thomas Shoal, which is very close to Sabina Shoal, the location of today's events. And we saw the Chinese on that day not only cause collisions, but also seized Philippine vessels and injured Filipino sailors, one of them seriously. So this is a regime in Beijing that has decided to use force, intimidation, and ramming to get what it wants.
You know, it reminds me, the idea of deliberately bumping up to another country's vessel, that is a move that, of course, during the Cold War, and I even think of about 20 years ago, there was a U.S. spy intelligence aircraft that was bumped by China and had to make an emergency landing. And the idea of bumping or damaging or colliding with an American or other vessel near China's territory, that's not a new trick. That's something even Russia would do in the past. That's something that, to knock it out of the sky as a warning, or in the case of that spy plane, to capture it and inspect it. Am I right?
You're right. That was April 1st, 2001, where a Chinese jet accidentally hit a U.S. Navy EP-3. The Chinese jet fell into the South China Sea. The pilot was killed. And our plane made an emergency landing at a Chinese field on Hainan Island, where the Chinese held the crew and they stripped the plane, a violation of American sovereignty. Now, since that time, we have seen some pretty dangerous Chinese flying in the last couple of years. So, for instance, on I think it was May 26, 2022, a Chinese fighter crossed a Australian P-8 operating in international airspace in the South China Sea. And the Chinese jet not only fired flares at the Australian craft, it dropped chaff, which is aluminum foil intended to confuse radar. And that chaff was actually ingested into one of the P-8's engines. Now, fortunately, the Australian crew was able to land their plane safely, but that was an act of skilled airmanship because they could have lost that plane.